This is a little bit like down home night for me because the last time I was in this hotel was I was at the 20-year reunion of my high school class at Olathe High School. Also, Dean Palos is here. He used to be my landlord in Lawrence at 846 Missouri. He probably doesn't remember me because I think I paid my rent on time most of the time. And it's good to hear from the people, our friends here from California, because about a year and a half ago I went to an environmental conference in Eugene, Oregon, and one of the presentations I went to was about the Port of Los Angeles, and I heard several lawyers talk about that, and it was a little bit shocking then, and it's a little bit shocking now, to hear about the air effects and the health effects of the concentrated emission of diesel, such as you have at a port or an intermodal facility. But I want to address briefly tonight water issues, because water and the Clean Water Act are really what give us the framework for the environmental process that we have here. And the reason is that on the intermodal site, on the proposed Gardner site, there are streams. There are about 17,000 linear feet of streams. And part of what Burlington proposes to do is to essentially destroy part of that. About 9,100 feet of streams will be destroyed by, essentially, they're going to take dirt from the site and fill in the streams. In order to do that, Burlington needs to get a permit, and the Army Corps of Engineers is the organization that puts that permit out. It's called a dredge and fill permit. It's basically any time a developer wants to fill in wetlands, they've got to get this permit. So Burlington has to do that. That's a little bit of a problem for Burlington, and they would say the problem is that they have to go through the process at all, and they've got to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers. But another problem is that their site is not water dependent, and the intermodal site doesn't need water. It doesn't need to be placed on a site with water. It just so happens that this one is. And so the law in that situation creates a presumption that wetlands are called special aquatic sites. There's a presumption that if your site is on a special aquatic site, that there exist other practicable alternatives where there are not wetlands, where there are not special aquatic sites. And what that does is puts the burden on the Corps of Engineers and on Burlington to show that they need to place it at this site anyway. I have a printout of the PowerPoint, and I think there's a way that we can get this PowerPoint to you. That's kind of the framework. I want to address some of the issues that arise with respect to water, and one is the proximity of the intermodal site with respect to various things. And I have a map. I wish I could put it up here. The proximity of the site to various things raises some concerns, both with respect to air and with respect to water. One is the high school and the middle school, which are about 3/4 of a mile from the site, and we've heard about that, and there are concerns about emissions into the air that can cause health issues for students and children. There are also subdivisions with people living within about a mile of the site. There's Millsdale Park to the south, is it southeast, is that right, to get my directions right, of the park. And then another concern with respect to water in particular is Hillsdale Lake, which is about 4 miles south of the Gardner Intermodal site. And the concern there is that the intermodal site lies in the watershed of Hillsdale Lake. So rain, spills, whatever water we have in this watershed are going to make their way ultimately to Hillsdale Lake. And the problem there is that Hillsdale Lake is a drinking water source for about 30,000 persons or 30,000 families. That's in South Johnson County and in Miami County. So Gardner, Edgerton, Spring Hill residents get drinking water from Hillsdale Lake. Big Bull Creek runs to Hillsdale Lake. Big Bull Creek is on the western edge of the intermodal site. The two streams that go through the intermodal site both go to Big Bull Creek, which then heads south to Hillsdale Lake. And that presents another problem for the Corps in issuing the permit and going through the NEPA process, because there's case law under the National Environmental Policy Act that says that it's almost automatically a concern if there's potential disruption of drinking water sources, potential contamination of drinking water sources. And you don't even have to necessarily violate the threshold levels under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but if there's a potential threat, that's something that needs to be looked into and ought to be explored and analyzed in an environmental impact statement. The second issue with respect to water is spills. Now, there are going to be spills on a site like this. There are things that you can do, measures you can take to prevent spills and to clean up and contain spills once they happen. But the fact is there are going to be spills. There always are on sites like this. And there are Burlington northern sites all over the country, and other sites too, of course, other company sites where there have been spills. Burlington has been the subject of lawsuits and regulatory enforcement actions in Idaho, New Jersey, North Dakota, Montana. And what generally happens is there are spills, diesel spills or spills from cargo, various kinds of spills, which can then make their way into surface water or into groundwater. And the problem there with spills going into groundwater, a couple of problems. One is if there are people with drinking water wells, and it's my understanding there are people in this watershed with drinking water wells, those drinking water wells could be threatened by groundwater contamination from spills from the site. Property can also be devalued, and millions of dollars are spent in order to prevent that, and when it happens, millions of dollars are spent in order to compensate persons whose property has been devalued. Burlington proposes to create a conservation corridor, what they call. Now, when I talked about filling in this stream, and they've got to get this permit to do that, they're also proposing to do a mitigation project, and essentially what they'll do is create another stream. There's a stream that goes through there. They'll fill that in, build over it, create this conservation corridor. On that conservation corridor, there will be this stream that they create and several retention ponds. Now, the environmental assessment addresses that, and it says, well, obviously the aquatic life in the one stream is going to be destroyed when this is filled in. They acknowledge as well that in the new stream that's created, there really won't be aquatic life to speak of, but there's a hope that eventually that aquatic life will develop. It's going to be difficult, though, and the EA actually acknowledges this. It's going to be difficult for aquatic life to develop in the situation where you've got construction and where you've got trains and trucks coming in. It's not obviously an ideal atmosphere for the development of aquatic life. But the rest of the area will be paved. And the problem with pavement is that the water doesn't have any place to go. It's not going to seep into the ground. It's going to go off-site. With an inch rain, a 1-inch rain over a 492-acre site that's mostly pavement, that's a lot of water that goes off-site. And that water going off-site can create flooding concerns, and it can also carry contaminants quickly off-site. And those contaminants can cause some of these problems that we've talked about, threats to drinking water, threats to groundwater. There's also a problem and conceivable issue with just the general operation of the intermodal facility. Aside from things like spills or flooding in extreme rain conditions, there is pollution that just results from the normal day-to-day operation of the intermodal site. Oil and grease, tire particles, things like that. Those things run off from wherever they happen to be into nearby streams, into drinking water. There's a remediation plan. As I mentioned, the conservation corridor will have some retention ponds. But the whole facility is not just, we need to remember, the intermodal site, but it's the logistics park that the Allen Group has proposed developing. And the remediation, there's not necessarily any separate remediation that goes with the development of the logistics park. So with the extra paving that goes along there can be extra runoff that's not really accounted for here that can go straight into the streams that make their way toward Hillsdale Lake and towards that vital drinking water source. Elaine, I think, is going to address some of these technical issues with respect to water in a little bit more detail than that. So that was all I had and wanted to hear from her, and then looking forward to hearing about the NEPA process, the whole environmental assessment process and an EIS process, we hope, from Melissa. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.